Shalom, shalom. It's a delight to be here with Rav Mike Feuer, lives in Israel with his family of 5 children, and he is an educator and an author and the founder of Jewish Heroism Project. So thanks for taking time to talk.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
There is so much to be joyful about in the world, that we're alive and we exist in this beautiful world. And there's so much to be anxious about and worried about with the current state of affairs. And we're here to unpack it all. And, we just came out of an intense period, even following Pesach, which feels like years ago.
Yeah, doesn't it?
Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, Yom HaZikaron, Israeli Memorial Day, Yom HaAtzmaut, Israeli Independence Day. What was the mood this year over these last few weeks and in general in Israel these days?
The word that comes to mind is somewhere between real and raw. I can tell you that Yom HaZikaron, the Memorial Day, we have in the city where I live in Maladimim, there's always a central ceremony, a tekes, and it was gut-wrenching. I mean, there are 7 citizens of our city who've died either in terror or war in the last 7 months now. So very raw, very real. A lot of questions of how do we do this? When it came to Pesach, that came up, but the answer is obvious. We had a Seder in the Warsaw Ghetto. They celebrated Purim before the expulsion from Spain. But when it comes to these national holidays, which are fresh in the calendar and are really based on our present national experience, it's really not so clear what to do. And yet, life has a way of just moving forward, ready or not.
Right. Yeah. So I think one of the things we're all thinking about among so many others is, how does this end? None of us know how this ends, this current conflict, this current iteration in Jewish history, but how do we win? How do we not just survive, but win? And I wonder, what does victory look like to you in all of this?
So victory to me has 2 faces. There's an internal and an external, which I think is always true. One is I think that we need to own our story, by which I mean we need to understand that we as a people have a mission in the world, and that to avoid it or to strive to be a nation like others is not going to take us in good places. And in particular, now that we actually hold power in a way in which we haven't done since the Second Commonwealth, right? It's particularly dangerous, because to fade into the woodwork when we didn't have power was a loss, but it wasn't so much damage. With power comes, of course, a lot of responsibility. We're all familiar with the phrase. And so therefore, the external, I really see responsibility in the form of sovereignty. And sovereignty is a word that gets used, and I think it's poorly understood. So I will just say briefly that sovereignty has 2 elements: power and responsibility. Up until now, the left and the right in Israel have been divided. One would like to not have any responsibility. That's a 2-state solution. Us here, them there. And, and that hasn't worked out well in the way that we've tiptoed our way around that. The right would like to have power with no responsibility. And I hate to say it, that's what you call an occupation. And I know that's a loaded term for some people, but nonetheless, power with responsibility means the acceptance, whether you say that there's another story, simply other human beings. We can talk about the religious elements, but a deep engagement, but sovereign, taking full responsibility and using the power that I believe that God has given us to establish a base for a good life for everyone, not just in our country, but I believe it will actually affect the region as a whole.
Yeah. So responsibility is so complicated, because are we primarily responsible to the hostages and bringing them home? Are we primarily responsible to defeating Hamas, whatever it takes to ensure October 7th never happens again? Are we primarily responsible to our young soldiers to make sure that they're out of harm's way? Are we responsible to the nations of the world who tell us to dictate what we should be doing?
Sure.
How do you think about responsibility in this moment?
So, and it's an excellent question. And I think that's why the vision piece is so important. If I believe that in the end of the day, what I'm striving for is power, rule over an era where I'm responsible for everyone there, then I can work toward that. So I will defeat Hamas, but I will do so in a way in which will leave a minimum amount of damage and long-term scarring amongst the average Palestinian. I will pursue the hostages, but not at the price of my national security, because, and you named the most difficult piece, I will send my sons and brothers and fathers into war to kill and die but knowing that it must be for the sake that when they're done, we're going to build something on their sacrifice, which is worthy of what they've done.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, there's been a lot of wrestling with how much our tradition has to guide us in a moment like this.
Yeah.
And I wonder, because one measure of victory, in addition to the sovereignty piece of responsibility and power, in addition to all the people you just mentioned, innocent Palestinians and our soldiers and the national security and the like, there's also our internal life. You mentioned story, but I wonder as it relates to midot, part of what victory looks like to me is that we come out, if not better, then worse as menschlichem, as people in the world. I don't know if that's possible. Maybe that's overly optimistic. Maybe I'm too far away from the conflict to even think that way. But I wonder, like, what does it look like in our inner lives of midot, our character, to even survive a moment like this?
Yeah, wow. You're hitting, I think, the most core issues. I'll tell you a story instead of answering directly. I sat with a young man who's dating my daughter right now recently. And
The daughter who's serving or a different daughter?
one of the daughters who's serving. And he's a commando. He's in a very serious combat unit that I'll leave unnamed. And he spoke about how like finally we're doing the work that we need to do. And what we spoke about is the fact that their generation has an opportunity to shape the world in which they will be leaders. It's a unique opportunity because I think that's how the very difficult and yes, scarring and painful and perhaps even to some degree, I don't want to say degrading, but callous. There's a necessity for a certain callousness to wage war. They will have an opportunity to fix it. Whereas I think so often our leaders inherit a world that someone else shaped, and it doesn't actually give that full processing of midot. Right. So, I mean, I agree with you 100%. God put us in the world to be whole human beings, not just to rule a piece of land. Right. But we've discovered through our history that in order to actually be those human beings, right, it's just like Archimedes said, right? Give me a lever and where to stand, I'll move the world. The lever that God gave us is the Torah, but the place we're meant to stand is the land of Israel. But if we're not the people who can actually put the two together, then neither of them is going to help us.
Yeah. Last question for you. So if you were here a few years ago, we'd be talking about COVID policies and the like.
Sure.
When you came about a year ago, we were talking about democracy in Israel and
that was it.
the judicial reforms and the like. And all that momentum kind of a lot of that momentum shifted into this moment. How do you think of kind of the health of the nation right now, and how it's shifted from that kind of moment of protest and turmoil to this moment, and in relationship to unity and respect and kind of cohesion?
Well, first, I would say that the nation is incredibly healthy. That the level of energy, and with all the pain and difficulty, even optimism, I think is shocking. And what links the sort of judicial reform movement and what's happening now is the fact that the leadership may be flailing, but the people are engaged on a level which is inconceivable. You know, they say in the few months after October 7th, after Simchat Torah, that over 50% of the country engaged in an official act of volunteerism.
Wow.
Right. And in the same way, whatever side I may have been on with the judicial reform, I was very proud of my country because people care. People out in the streets because they care about real issues. Now, you put your finger on the challenge, is that as the people who cares, we often fight each other. And I'm hoping and praying that we will merit to bring leaders up from within us who know how to unite instead of how to divide. Yeah,
very nice. The Talmud says, I guess, whereas we're approaching Shavuot, one of the reasons, or perhaps the reason, in this midrash at least, why the Jewish people were chosen for Matan Torah is because we're oz, we're strong. And that strength can be used to protect, it can be used to hurt, it can be used in all kinds of ways. I just pray for us and for your family and for our community and for all of Am Yisrael that we balance our chesed and gevura, that we figure out restraint when needed and strength when needed, and not only survive, but thrive in this moment.
And I just want to add one thing is that when you're facing fellow Jews who are angry and disagree, remember they're angry and they disagree because they care.
Right. That's well said.
If you can focus on the fact it's because they care, it makes bridges instead of divides.
Beautiful.